Okay, I'll call the order to Truckee River Flood Management Authority meeting of May 10th with a roll call, please.
I'll do that. Ron Smith.
Here.
Vaughn Hartung.
Present.
Hillary Sheeby is absent. Don Abbott.
Here.
Naomi Doer.
Here.
Jeannie Herman.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, if you all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Dewar, would you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to the public comment. I do have 2 cards. Anybody else in the audience wishing to speak this morning, would you please fill out a card? Our first speaker is Roger Jacobson. Come on up, Roger. Welcome.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for letting us come here and talk for a few minutes. I'm Roger Jacobson. I'm the representative, one of the representatives from the Quantico's Downtown Sparks. We are here to talk briefly about the building that we're hoping to work with you on Mill Street. We unfortunately have lost our lease where we're currently, our bicycle and other operations are ongoing, and so we were lucky enough to be able to talk to Michael and Eric as far as working on getting this new facility set up. We're hoping that that works. We realize that we're going to have quite a bit of work ahead of us. We've been fortunate so far that we've lined up several contractors that are willing to work with us as soon as we get an okay, and we are ready to move forward. We have a general contractor, plumbing, HVAC, hopefully an electrical contractor very soon, because we need to bring the building up to code. As most of you know, the building was stripped of most of its copper and somewhat damaged, although it's a great building. It's structurally sound. It's a block building with a metal roof. It's in great shape that way. Just the inside is going to need some work. So we're hoping we can move forward with your approval. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Roger. Next speaker is Su Ting Chen. Welcome, Sue. Su Ting.
Okay, I have notes. We are very grateful for this. Oh, sorry. I'm Su Ting. I'm president of the Downtown Sparks Kiwanis Club, and we're speaking about the same agenda item, so that building on Mill Street. We're so grateful for this unique opportunity to continue our programs. We love helping get kids outside and get bikes into the hands of kids who may not be able to otherwise get them. This space really fits our needs in having a space for a repair workshop for kids, veterans, parents, and other adults to learn how to work on bikes. And we also have great access to bike trails right there for our summer camps that we like to run every year. The location has plenty of space for us to continue working on our other projects as well, including our community bookshelf program, which brings thousands of books to kids, and our pediatric trauma prevention dolls that we work on that we deliver to local hospitals to ease the stress of a hospital stay for kids in our area. We look forward to serving the children of our community with your continued support. Thank you.
Thank you, Su Ting. Anybody else in the audience wishing to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the authority. Move on to approval of the agenda. Looking for a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously. 1D, approval of draft minutes of April 12th, 2019 Board of Directors meeting. Anybody want to pull anything or make changes? Then looking for a motion to accept?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Did you get that, Danielle? What was it? Hartung and then Dewar did the second. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, announcements and clippings. Jay.
You see the clippings in your board packet. I would like to introduce the soon-to-be Deputy Director of the Truckee River Flood Management Authority. That's George Robeson. And George is here. He would come up and introduce himself come to the podium.
Welcome, George.
Yeah, thank you.
George is a local, graduated locally from UNR, also has his PhD from Oregon State University in forestry and in civil engineering. He is working currently for McMillan Jacobs, a consulting engineer, and funny thing, he does hydraulics and hydrology. So his understanding of the flood project is going to be very important, and so I will have him as a deputy for the next while. And if there's any questions for George, you certainly can pose them.
Why don't you just say a few things about yourself, George?
Okay, well, I moved here when I was about 12 years old and spent...
2 years ago.
No, yeah, 2 years ago, wish. But I lived here for about, 15 years in the area, and I actually got interested in hydraulics and hydrology on the Truckee River. That's actually how I got interested in it. And I went to Reno High, UNR, and then I went off to Oregon State and studied hydrology and then later hydraulics. I've worked in the state of Oregon as the lead surface water hydrologist for the state, also as the state's in-stream flow specialist, also as the state's dam safety engineer. So I have a lot of experience in state government, state policy, worked on a lot of legislation, as well as done a lot of projects. In the last 9 years, I've been working with McMillan Jacobs, and I've been working on very similar projects to the flood projects, such as the Napa Dry Bypass. I was the lead hydraulic engineer, and I was also the person that implemented the Boise River water parks along the Boise River for our company's part, which was about a mile of the area there right in downtown Boise. So I have a lot of experience that's related, and really excited to kind of circle back on my home stream. You know, it's really fun to be back on my home river.
And you were a vital part of our Needs Committee.
Yeah, I
Member.
did that for the last couple of years, and that was a real, probably if I didn't do the committee, I wouldn't have been comfortable applying.
Yeah.
So I really got to know what you guys were about and what you wanted to do.
Any questions for George? Anybody comments? George, when are you going to come aboard?
What's that?
When are you coming aboard?
A week from Monday.
Okay, good.
Just super excited to
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
him. What a
Well, I'm
great
excited
addition.
too, Naomi.
Yeah, what a great addition.
Yeah, thank you.
Good stuff. Good choice. Thanks, George.
All right.
Okay, number 2, discussion and possible action to elect the 2019 Flood Management Authority Board of Directors Chair and Vice Chair. We'll go with the chair first.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hartung.
I would nominate you as chair again. I think you're the obvious choice. You've done a great job, and I'd like to keep the direction that we're going.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, Vice Chair. I'll make a motion, and I would like to nominate our current Vice Chair, Von Hartung. He's been doing a great job, and we want to continue that.
Second?
We have a motion, and we have a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Thanks to everybody. Number 3, Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC report and discussion, possible action to provide direction to staff. Danielle.
Thank you. You have the report before you. I don't see, Mr. Martini is here in the audience, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you.
Okay, you do have the report in your
In the board packet.
I did
the
have a
packet.
question, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Stewart.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Danielle, if you could just, what is the, number 1 or 2 top things that TAC's been discussing lately?
The TAC went through the tentative budget, and Jay made a presentation, and so they sort of went through what our projects might be over the next year and discussed that. And they have discussed in some detail the work that's been proposed and now recently approved by the board to move forward with updating the FEMA maps in the Truckee Meadows area. So they had some discussion on that and supported that as it was recommended to the board. So,
And is that project moving forward? I mean, is there a time frame on that?
yes, it is. I would defer to Director Aldine to answer that question, but it is moving forward. It was recently approved by the board.
2 years.
It's going to
2 years.
take a total of 2 years.
It's a two-year contract with a probable additional year as FEMA drags their feet as they typically do.
So you think we'll have the updated maps in 3 years?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jay, on those maps, what's the circumference? Is it just the Truckee River itself, or is it all contributing features to the Truckee River watershed?
The maps are somewhat subjective in that it's of the Truckee River watershed. It's up the major tributaries to the point that they no longer influence the Truckee River watershed on the river. So there has to be some calculation done to determine where that point is. So for example, Steamboat Creek would go south along Steamboat Creek to somewhere between Miraloma and Damani, somewhere around there. That's where we will end our work. And part of the reasoning for that is that we're not spending our money on project elements at this time outside of the Truckee River influence, the actual main stem influence. So we have stopped, and I've given instructions to the consultant team to stop at those locations. So they may go up the North Truckee Drain for a little while. I don't know how far up it will be.
That's my question. Is
But
how
that'll-
up into Sparks?
Yeah, it'll go up in there somewhere from Lillard to wherever it ends, wherever they just determine the influence of the river to not be impactful to the actual water surface elevation. So it's kind of a trial and error type thing. They have to determine that, and then they will cut it off, and that will become the map. And then if Sparks wants to pursue further, or the Reno or Washoe County wants to pursue further, then they may do that. But at this time, that's what the scope of the project entails.
Okay. And the only reason I bring this up is going south, as far as Washoe Lake, that's a contributing feature to the Truckee River watershed. And so, you know, I mean, and going north, Spanish Springs contributes water to the Truckee River watershed.
Yes, it does. But there's a point where you can determine that the impact is minimal from those particular features you mentioned, Washoe Lake and Spanish Springs. And we will go up far enough to where the noticeable impact is now minimized.
Okay. Love to see the map, Mr. Wolf.
We will definitely provide that to the board.
Mr. Walls.
Yeah, if I may, part of the consideration here was the use of the 377B funds. Those are restricted both by the 377B plan and by the interlocal cooperative agreement. Since those funds have been restricted to the flood project, and the mapping is integral
To the flood project.
to the flood project. However, once we get outside of the footprint of the flood project, there are concerns that those funds are not being used as intended and legally restricted. So that was part of that analysis, I think, that Jay was trying to explain. That's kind of the underlying issue.
I guess one of the things that I contend is if we look at all the contributing features to the Truckee River watershed and we look at controlling them, not necessarily cutting them off, but just attenuating those flows, it'll dramatically change the scope of work in the Truckee River basin itself. Because I know that there's a lot that's coming from the west, I understand that, but that was the whole idea of controlling those features was everything from not Stampede, but Prosser down to Stampede. The intent was to control that water. And coming in from our basin, if you don't control those waters, Sparks, as an example, had to complete the North Truckee drain because there was so much water coming out of Spanish Springs and that whole developed area out there that there was no place for it to go. And so now it's contributing, to the Truckee River again, where it probably had done that naturally. So I guess I'm a little fuzzy as to why we wouldn't broaden the scope to try to control, everything from Hunter to Thomas to White's to all of those features that do contribute. And that's all. I don't need an answer. It's just a.
And
it's
Mr.
just-
Chair, as a follow-up, what I'd like to request, since this isn't agendized specifically, but I would like to better understand where Mr. Hartung's going and what the extent of the current MAP 377B plan is. Maybe we could, when we get to agenda items, I'd like to ask to that, come back with a map and a description of what's in the 377B plan.
Okay.
That'd be great.
And I think the North Truckee Drain, the biggest part of that is where it emptied into the river. That's
Yeah.
what caused all the flooding. So that was one of the main reasons we built it and moved it. So, okay. Any other questions, comments? We'll move on to number 4, financial items. Presentation and discussion of a proposed lease of approximately 1.45 acres of land in the buildings at 5305 Mill Street. Is this you, Mr. Wolves?
Yes, it is. So item 4 presents a proposed lease for your consideration of the Cooperative Extension Building by the Kiwanis Club of Downtown Sparks for the use in their bicycle training program. Bidding is not required since they are a nonprofit organization under NRS 244-284. This building was purchased in approximately in the spring of 2006. It's been unoccupied since 2011. It has been, as was mentioned during public comment, it has been rather extensively vandalized. The physical structure is fine, but the plumbing systems have been heavily damaged. The HVAC systems damaged, and the electrical system was completely stripped. We have had other entities inquire about that building, but have then backed off rather quickly when they've seen the expense of renovation that would be required. And as we've discussed the use of this building with various outside entities, kind of the starting point for us is that we do not incur any expense in the use of that, in that facility. Under the terms of the agreement, the Kiwanis will pay no rent for the first 4 years of the lease, at least. Should the lease continue past the initial 4 years, then the Board of Directors could revisit the rent issue. The Kiwanis will bear all costs of renovation, maintenance, assessments, and the operation of that building throughout the term of the lease. As mentioned, the intent here is that we incur no expense that will come out of those 377B funds. We have retained the right to use 2 storage units. I don't know if you're familiar with the building. There are actually 2 buildings on the property. There was the main office building, and then there is a rather large storage building with, I think it's about 10 or 12 storage stalls. 6. Wow, I was off. But we've retained the right to use 2 of those to kind of store some of the items that we have as an entity. As you know, we're reducing our square footage in our office, and there's some equipment that has to be stored. The Kiwanis maintain the choice, if they prefer, to rent us 2 storage units elsewhere if they, just to make that switch, if they feel that they need that space. But again, we would still have that storage opportunity. The initial term of the lease will be for 2 years. During that initial 2-year period, we can only terminate the lease for cause, and otherwise, if they breach the lease. Following that, we have another 2-year term. During that time, we may terminate the lease by giving them 365 days notice. Then there's an additional optional 2-year term after that. During that final 2-year term, we can terminate with 90 days notice. This is structured to kind of accomplish 2 things. First, Kiwanis will be making a significant financial investment in the building, and they want to have as much of a guarantee that they'll see the benefit of that as possible, which we appreciate. As we get further into time, our plans become less and less certain. We're pretty sure that we're not going to be doing any construction near that site for 3 or 4 years. Following that, we don't know, and so the shorter notice provision is in there to protect us so that should we come to some sort of agreement with the Corps of Engineers or construction moves forward more quickly than anticipated, that we can then terminate that lease if we need that property. So we've tried to maintain the flexibility while giving them some assurance that they will see the benefit of their investment. The Kiwanis, of course, must carry liability insurance. There'll be a $1 million insurance policy. We have a very aggressive hold harmless provision in this agreement. One of the concerns that we've had, of course, is there are going to be large numbers of people in and out of that building, including children. And we wanted to the extent we can, assure, we want to make sure that we do not have any liability should something happen. This building is taken by the Kiwanis as is. They bear all responsibilities for bringing it up to code and to making it sufficient for their purposes. And the judgment of whether it is safe falls to them. And so that hold harmless provision is pretty aggressive. There's no way to guarantee that the agency would not be sued. But I think we've done everything we can to assure that if that were the case, that Kiwanis would be responsible for making us whole if there was any liability found. And with that, those are the general terms, unless you have any questions.
Questions
turn
or
it back to
comments?
you.
Mr. Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wolz, has this building historically flooded?
No,
It has not.
we did not flood in 97.
Okay.
Neither did the Excel building that we have already taken down.
How about in the 80, what is it, 86?
The 86, I don't know if it, I don't know.
Okay.
I doubt it because the 86 storm was centered mostly over Sparks. So the flooding probably occurred more at the front end of the industrial area of Sparks, you know, what's Larkin Circle, Gregg Street there, that area probably flooded more than anything in 86.
I guess, and the reason I'm asking this is we're gonna have a couple of storage units there. And, I mean, we're gonna be storing some of our things there, and, you know, do we have a plan in the event that an event comes close?
We currently store items at that building.
Okay.
That's the one use that we have made of it. Over the years, we've gradually reduced the
All
amount
of our servers and that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah. We keep our vehicles there, you know, all the good stuff. It's basically just kind of overflow, unused equipment and office furniture.
Cubicle types of furniture.
Okay.
So we did, since the type of equipment I think that will be going in there also is going to be some of the stuff that we use for our flood warning system, the maintenance of that.
Okay, and I think that this is a great idea. I think that this is a wonderful partnership. My only concern will be, you know, what happens if, and I read section 2, and then I also looked at section 9 for condemnation. Devil's advocate here. Suddenly, we get the ability to build our project. What happens to them if we have to go in and basically say, look, we're out in a shorter period of time than what the contract contemplates? And I know that's a long shot, but we have to discuss those things.
The answer to that is that's the risk they're taking under
Okay.
this agreement. And I don't know what they would do, but they would have to vacate the premises in a hurry.
Okay.
Now, that having been said, we have been subject to condemnation in one instance in the past. Now, that was negotiated, and that was with the McCarran widening, if you recall. And it was, that process, even in a negotiated circumstance, moves fairly slowly. So I don't think we'd be in a situation where we would show up and I'd give Roger a call and say, you've got 20 days to get out. They would have a longer period of time. I have not recently looked at plans in that area, but I don't believe that there are any plans to widen Mill Street in the foreseeable future in that stretch. So I think that is highly unlikely that we would see
And
that.
if there were, there's enough room to give them 15, 20 feet. They could probably still have egress and ingress into the property without any real damages. If you look at the map in the staff report, you can see there's just one, it's kind of an aerial photograph. You can see that it's a very small piece of property in relation to the size of the other property which we hold. It is south of the ditch, the drainage ditch there, Pioneer. It is really out of the way for any construction that we might do in the future. Originally, we had planned to put a levee right across the front part of that building, and that whole building was definitely coming out. Now, that's not necessarily the case. It becomes an issue of how the agency, the TURFMA agency, and how the cities of Reno and the county want to develop that for park space, ultimately. So the notion is it's so far out of the way that I didn't see a real hazard or a real problem being generated for time. I suspect they'll have more time than we're actually negotiating at this time. And another future TURFMA board will be looking at giving them extended periods, because it's so far out of the way. It's out of the way of the project. There's possibility of widening Mill without any really degradation to the building. They just have to put curb and gutter and whatever the city or the county or the RTC would do in doing that. So that's the reason why I supported the notion.
And I look at this as a win, because even if we do decide that we need park space, we also need building space as well. You've got to have office space, and so I think that this is. I looked at the same maps, and I kind of tried to determine how things might occur. One never knows, of course, but I view this as a win, and if there are no other questions, I'm ready to make a motion.
I have a comment.
Ms. Stewart?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say, how impressed I am with this idea. I think it's fantastic. I'm very well acquainted with the Kiwanis Bike Program. I've actually volunteered over there from time to time, sent many people to their program. It was really sad to hear that they were losing their space over there in Parr. And I think, it does need some work. And I had a question for them, if one of them would come forward, Dr. Jacobson. I was just wondering, the storage unit, you think that's big enough to store all the bikes? Because I know how many bikes you have.
We're also really lucky because we have storage space at Immigrant Storage. And so we have several other places around town that we store bikes that we don't need all the time. For example, the Burning Man bikes that are a once-a-year activity. That's one of our fundraisers. So, yes, we've already thought about that, and we're also hoping, because of once we get through our initial costs of getting this set up, we're anticipating that we won't have to sell as many Burning Man bikes. We can focus more on the kids' programs because we won't be paying that huge amount of rent every year.
Right.
And so that's one of our wins on this side, so that we can sell less bikes, and so we need to store less bikes, and therefore it should all balance out.
Okay.
We hope
That's
pretty
what
well.
I was imagining, because
Yeah.
I know how big a warehouse that you had and how many bikes you had on site at any one time. And I was trying to figure out, how do you fit this 10-pound bag into a 5-pound sack, I wasn't really sure.
Yeah, this space is, area-wise, it's about half as big as what we currently have.
Yeah.
And, but again, like I said, we have other storage activities, and we're really hoping to cut back. One of the reasons we had to do so many bikes was to pay the rent.
Yeah.
Anybody who's looked at commercial properties, we're getting a really good deal, but the owner decided to sell. And it was kind of a last-minute thing. It looked like it was going along fine. We could get another 3 years, and then he decided to put up 3 of his big warehouses for sale. This one is probably sold soon. We're not sure. He hasn't
Yeah.
done the deal. And then 2 others one sold and one is almost sold, so.
Okay. All right, well, it would be my great pleasure to make a motion on this item. Looks like there's another question.
Mr. Abbott?
Not so much a question, more of a comment. I know when I was at your guys' meeting, we were talking about this, and I think it's so neat that we came to with the government nonprofit partnership that and it's working out great. And more importantly, you're getting closer to downtown Sparks. So that's another positive. So I'll pass that back over to you, Ms. Stewart. I think you want to take a stab at the motion.
With your permission, Mr. Chair, I would make a motion that we move forward with the lease as described by our legal counsel and in our board folder with the terms and conditions as laid
Okay,
out.
so I'm going to open up a public comment here for a
Yeah,
second,
that's
and then
fine.
we'll do that. So anybody, because there's such interest, anybody want to speak to this issue? Seeing none, we bring it back and go ahead and make your motion now, Ms. Stewart.
Again, could I just say what I just said? I'd like to move that we move forward with leasing this property on McCarran to the Kiwanis Bike Program with the consideration terms and conditions as laid out in the lease as described by our attorney and in our board folder. And I guess that would be the end of the motion.
Okay, we have a motion, looking for a second? We have a second from Ms. Herman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously. Congratulations. Okay, 4B, discussion and possible action to approve TURFMA Resolution 2019-10. That resolution authorizes the executive director to sell TURFMA personal property. Jay?
Well, just, Mike has that item as well.
Okay.
Yes, as you recall, as the board approved the demolition of the Bristlecone buildings some months ago. Those have been completed. At that time, a request was made that we make some effort to salvage or save any interesting or architecturally significant elements from that building. We were not given any real direction at that point what to do with those. We have done that. It was interesting as part of this, we had, in the bid process, attempted to see if we got a improved price on the demolition, if the contractor was allowed to sell some of these items. It was interesting to us that they really didn't have any interest in doing that, and it didn't really affect the price. So what we did is we spent a little bit more to preserve some of these items. We identified them and they put them aside. Among these were the large glue laminate beams in the chapel. There were some hand-hewn wood beams in the great room that were saved. The mantelpiece from the fireplace was saved, although that had been damaged. That had been broken in a vandalism attempt, which is a shame because how long was that mantelpiece? I'm looking at. It was huge. It was huge, and it was probably 7-8 inches thick, hand hewn. It was a beautiful piece of wood. We still have that, and I think it probably does have some value. We've also saved the railings from the stairwell and the stairway in the great room, and the keystone from the fireplace, which had the Flick Ranch brand on it. So we have that. So unfortunately, because of the size of most of these items, we don't have any place where we can store them. They're just out in the open, in the elements. And so this resolution is to grant some discretion and authority to the executive director to dispose of those items. Now, the executive director, interestingly, as I've done the research on this, cannot donate property. If any donations are made, that has to come to the board. However, you can delegate some authority to him to sell those items. And so this resolution is granting that authority and delegate some discretion to him to determine when and how and whether to make a sale of some of those items. So that's the purpose behind it. We do not have a system in place yet as to how we will dispose of those. It will be public and there'll be a significant amount of notice. Have been some debate whether that will be full-on auction or if we'll just put them in lots and ask for bids, request for proposals. But anyway, we will dispose of that. There may be one or two items that Jay is going to look at and determine that perhaps the board, we would either retain it for our own purposes, keeping probably the keystone for the fireplace that could be used once the property is developed, once the park area out there is developed, or could be given to a local historical society, something along those lines. So you're giving him the discretion to determine what would be sold as well.
Okay, questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hartung?
I think this is a great idea also. I'd love to see a program like Salvage Dogs come in and you know, do a piece on it, if they'd come this far west. But I'm ready to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
I have a question, comment.
We can take the motion and then we go to questions.
I move to approve resolution number 219-10, a resolution authorizing the executive director to sell the Turfma personal property salvage from the demolition of certain buildings.
Okay, we have a motion. Look for a second.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Dewar?
Yes, thank you. You know, I was one of those that advocated for retaining as much material as we could from the property. And what inspired me, one, obviously I care about historical things in general. We've had good experiences with other properties, you know, finding some good materials. Number two, when I was with the flood project, one of the big interests came from the Catholic Church, who had previously owned this property, and they were very interested in the bell that used to be in the bell tower. And we made arrangements at that time for them to actually acquire the bell, take it, and they moved it to, as I recall, Yarrington. And I just wondered, Jay, if you have reached out on the arches of the chapel and actually discussed it with them, you know, if they had any interest. And if not, I mean, no big deal, but I just was curious.
Eric Sheets has done that, and I will let him report that
Okay.
conversation.
All right, thank you. Eric Sheets for the record again. We did reach out to Mike Quilici with Minogue and the Catholic Church, and we've asked them. They were not interested.
Okay.
So that actually was our preference, to see something, you know, go to a nonprofit. We've tried a few nonprofits. Doesn't mean we've tried everything, but I mean, we've tried. And nobody's gotten back to us.
Okay.
So, or they flat out said no.
Well, I would really support this because I think there are people in the community, especially when you mentioned the mantle. I mean, there are places, I'll just pick one, fireplace distributors, that take beams, repurpose them, and create new mantles for people. And they're, as a for-profit business, but, you know, they could potentially reutilize that. So what I'd like to see is that it's done in a, you know, open manner where at least one time people can bid before you start just, you know, getting rid of it in a landfill or something.
Mr. Chair, as Mr. Walls explained, there is discretion here, and I would invite any of the board members that have any ideas on a particular piece to set aside. We can do that, and I will work with any of the board members to do that. Or if the public should have any suggestions as well, we will take those and we will try to use them for the best of the community.
Okay, any other questions or comments? We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Thanks, Eric. C, presentation discussion of the final fiscal year 2019-2020 budget. Lori, welcome.
Good morning. Lori Williams, Senior Financial Analyst for Truckee River Flood Management Authority. In your packet, you do have the typical 3 budget sheets that you see every time we talk about budget. We have the summary as first, which is a summary of the general fund and the capital projects fund and the assignments. We also have the detail, if you can get your microscope out and read it, of all of the budget lines for the general fund. And then finally, you have all of the budget lines for the capital projects fund. What we're looking at today is virtually the same thing we looked at last month. There are just maybe $20,000 in adjustments to payroll that have been inserted since that time, so that we actually conform to the forecasts presented by Washoe County, because our payroll is prepared by Washoe County, since we are employees basically of Washoe County. So those kinds of changes have been included, and that's really the only difference. So what I wanted to do was just basically do a quick overview and give you the opportunity for questions. So just to quickly go over what we talked about last month, you'll recall that our outlook for the next year and the next few years is basically stable. We don't have anything really changing. We don't have any unanticipated surprises. Nothing that we haven't discussed regularly here at our meetings. And the one thing that I will point out that has changed, and we did mention it last time, is that we're refocusing so that our fund balance can be assigned to a fiscal year 23 or 24 project for the Vista Narrows. So in an attempt to accumulate about $30 million in the next few years, you'll see in the last slide of the presentation when we talk about assignments, some of our fund balance being set aside for a Vista Narrows project, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. So just to start, we'll look at the general fund budget, and again, we're just referring to this front sheet that you have, just the summary, because we've gone over it before. And what we have here is the budget for fiscal year 2019, which is the far left column, and also the estimated fiscal year 19 ending fund balance, which is important because that is where we actually start our budget year, is how we end the current year. So just to take a quick look at that and to show you the differences between the two. You look at the revenue line and you'll notice that it's about $482,000 projected to be under budget. That's mainly because as of about the first of the year, we started with higher than normal for the previous year's payments for debt service to Washoe County. So we have incorporated those into our ending fund balance forecast, and of course they are included in our budget for fiscal year 20. That is not a reflection of declining sales tax revenues. They have continued to increase. We're looking at about 3 to 5% increase over last year for this year. And we're projecting about the same for next year, nothing really changing. As far as salaries and wages, you'll see if you add up the two negative numbers, $119,000 and almost $50,000, we've got about $170,000 less in expenses for payroll than we had budgeted. And that's primarily because we had one staff member leave in August. We left her position vacant. And as of the first of the year, we had our hydrogeologist leave, and his position's been vacant for 6 months. So that's the savings that we saw for that. And the clerical person will be coming back in fiscal year 20. That position has been added to the budget, and we will be using our retired hydrogeologist as a consultant in 2020. So that's included in the services account. So that's kind of been taken care of there. The big change is the next line, services and supplies. We budgeted $4.1 million. We're looking to spend just under $1 million. And that's primarily because some of those expenses, as you know from past years, we budget for them, and then because of the way things happen, it just moves to the next year, and that's what some of this is. We had over $1 million in payments to the Corps for the project review that they're doing, and we have not been asked to make any more payments this year. We don't anticipate that to happen, so we're going to push all of that to fiscal year 20. The other thing is the FEMA mapping. We have not had to make any payments on that. That hasn't been undertaken as yet, so that's being pushed to next year in case that does start at any point. We have it available. And we do have a line for miscellaneous unallocated services, because at this time we're going to be having some changes in our leadership, and just to have some funds available, we do have that in our budget as well. So those have not been used. They're going to be moved, and that's what you see in that unspent column there. As far as the transfers out, we did anticipate significant transfers to the capital projects fund, and we did not actually make them. We don't plan to be making all of those, but I will talk about those when we get to the capital projects fund. What I want to point out at this time is, while we budgeted to have just under $12 million left in the general fund's ending fund balance, we are anticipating we'll have about $25 million. So that's what's happened this year, what we expect to end the year with, and what we expect to start next year's budget with. As far as the budget, here it is, and again, it's the same part of that report. I've just added the far right column to include the fiscal year 20 budget so that you can compare it to 19 budget and anticipated actual for 19. You'll see that the revenues are virtually the same. They are decreased a little bit from actual in 19, but that is the continued increase in the debt service payment, so it's reflected there. Salaries and wages, they are about the same. They have increased because we have added one FTE that had resigned. I mentioned that we have the clerical person being put back in the budget. I believe it's in the second quarter of the year, so that part's in there. And one thing to point out is that while all of the Washoe County increases for health insurance, there is an increase for retirement, anticipated salaries, all of that's included in here. One thing that is different for Truckee River Flood Management Authority is the OPEB contribution. You know, we've talked about that a long time. In fiscal year 16, you did vote to remove 2 positions from our position control system at Washoe County. We should have seen a reduction in that OPEB contribution, which we haven't. But in 2020, it finally hit. So we've seen some progress, so that's something to be glad about. Looking at services and supplies, you'll see that we're expecting to end the year with under $1 million spent for services and supplies. We're budgeting for 5.1 million. And again, that is basically because we're pushing the core monies over, we're pushing the FEMA mapping over. There's some engineering fees that we're expecting to have for some of our engineering services that we didn't do this year, we'll do in the coming year. And we do have that unallocated miscellaneous line for new administration in case anything's needed. And just something to point out, basically out of all of the services and supplies lines in our detailed budget, all of them but 7 either stayed the same or decreased. And of those 7, 6 of them are only increases of $7,000 or less. The big one was in professional services, and that is that unallocated line. So moving to the capital budget, as far as what we have, we're now going to look at this middle section of this summary sheet where the capital projects funds reported. Basically, we have all of the projects that we have in that. If you look, I'm sorry, I don't have a pointer, but under expenditures, you'll see Hidden Valley Home Elevation Program. Oh, very handy. And I don't even move my hands. The environmental baseline surveys, all of those lines have been budgeted for fiscal year 19. And you'll notice that they are either completed or they're being continued or rolled over to fiscal year 20. So there's nothing new added there. It's everything you're familiar with. The one line that was removed was unallocated for 6.8 million. That was we took that money and did shift it to services that I talked about earlier. It wasn't the whole 6.8 million, but it was a portion of it, just so that we have that flexibility. We've talked in the past about how money that goes into the capital projects fund has to be used there. So this year we're shifting it back to general fund, so there is that flexibility. It can be used for general fund purposes, or we can do an augmentation and shift it back into capital projects, but it does give the administration that flexibility. You'll notice that because of that desire to maintain that flexibility, we keep a very low ending fund balance in that account. So we're looking at just having about $23,000 in there when we end the year, if everything goes according to plan. Now the next slide is what I've been referring to. These are the assigned resources at the end of every budget period and at the end of this summary again. You'll see this assigned section at the bottom of the page. We've added the first line on that list. Assigned for Vista Narrows project, fiscal year 2023 or 2024. You know, of course, the year is not set in concrete. At this point, it's estimated to be a $30 million project. And of our $23 million ending fund balance that we're looking to have at the close of 2020, we are proposing that 18 million be set aside for that purpose. That does not mean that the board cannot access that in case there is an emergency or some new issue comes up that needs to be addressed, it is just merely like a memo type set aside so that you can keep track of what's available and what you've already kind of committed to for future use. The next three lines, assigned for operations, emergency repair, replacement, and long-term capital replacement, those are all lines that we have in there as a result of the ICA. At this point, we are not required to have those lines, but they are preparatory to when we actually do get to a point we ever want to enforce or impose rates. And once we start imposing rates, we have to have those up to a required percentage of the various line items that you can see there. We've started working on those. I think we have the first two, or the first one is at the point it needs to be, and the second one, no, it's not. Yes, it is. I'm sorry. The first and the third are pretty much where they need to be. The middle one needs to be worked on a little bit more. It's about half what it should be. But once we have the rates in place, we have 3 years to bring all those up to full levels. So this is a really good start. This is what the board opted to do. And again, just like that first line, if anything came along, you can take the money out and use it for something else. But you've committed to kind of earmarking that for those purposes. And finally, not related to the ICA at all, just an administrative designation, is assigning $500,000 for insurance deductions. And we have our insurance policy, and we do have $500,000 deductible. So heaven forbid anything serious were to occur, we have that money, we can just pull it right out and get using it. So the bottom line, after all those assignments is you basically have about $1.1 million at the end of fiscal year 2020 that you have at your disposal for anything that you may wish to address or take care of during the year. But otherwise, you've got them committed to these lines. And that's what we're proposing for this year. And that, as I said, is pretty much what we talked about last month. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Questions or comments? Mr. Horton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a fast question. Back on our hydrogeologist, when they left the organization, and now we're contracting that same person back, will it be more expensive having the contract, or because, you know, essentially having a contract means they bill us for everything?
No, because there will not be the same required hours. Part of the hours that were used in that position will be picked up by Danielle, our environmental supervisor.
Okay.
And these will just be additional hours where the both of them will go out into the field and do sampling. And I can't really speak to all of the details related to that, but I can assure you it will not be.
So in the longer term, it'll be less
Yes,
money
it'll
for
be a
the
savings.
organization? Okay,
Yes.
all right.
A question on that.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Dewar?
Does, since they're coming back off retirement, are they required to only earn a certain amount, or have they fully retired and they have to get an exemption?
He's fully retired, so he's coming back as a consultant. So he's not on the payroll and does not have those kinds of per requirements. I think there are some kind of stipulations perhaps that Jay's looked into that he might be able to address.
Yeah, we had a contract immediately, beginning January, for emergency purposes, should we have received a weather condition that would have mandated, that position to go up to the EOC and to help out in that area. We will we've waited the 90 days that are required before we rehire an employee. And we were only anticipating a $25,000 contract, which is much less than not only the salary and the benefits associated with that position, because we have coverage through Ms. Henderson. So we looked at all of that, and we followed the PERS guidelines and Washoe County's personnel procedures as well, to make sure that we were totally in keeping with those.
And Mr. Chair, I had another question going back to the capital. If you could, Lori, go back to.
Oh,
So on the last page of the capital, the unassigned, I just, or assigned, informally assigned, I guess is how you characterized it. It's like we have a project we're trying to accrue money for, but as you said, there could be something else that comes forward. We have a partner, somebody else steps forward to work with us on another project, a sub-element, sort of like the Marina Sparks Indian Colony thing, where we could take the advantage of some matching opportunities or something. Is this sitting in the operating versus capital? So it's not over in capital. So how much we actually transfer and at what time is completely
Right, that
open.
would be subject to an augmentation, so you would be
Yeah.
fully informed of what that was and how it
Okay.
would be used.
But it's technically sitting over there in operating,
Technically, right now, it's just sitting in the fund balance.
oh, in the fund balance, okay.
Allocated for anything. Yes, you'll see the
Okay.
top line says total fund balance, 23 million. So these are all assignments of that fund balance.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
the board just says, this is how we would like to earmark them. They're not committed. It's
Okay.
not an agreement.
We're not
It's-
pledging a future
No.
board or something?
No.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, any other
Good job.
questions or comments? Okay, looking for a motion, Mr. Hartung.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Now, we don't have a meeting yet set for the 23rd, do we?
Yes, 8:30. 8:30 in the morning at Sparks.
Okay, I don't
For
have
the
it on my
hearing, the
calendar,
public
so,
hearing?
okay. 8:30 on the 23rd
Yes, so this budget will be returned
of
to
May
you.
23rd.
May 20th. Yeah,
On
this
May
month.
23rd, yes. 8:30 at the Sparks Council
Chambers?
Chambers.
Okay. D, monthly report on the authority's financial status and related financial activities.
Again, we've pretty much just discussed how our year will end, and everything as of March 31st is flowing right into that situation. I did mention the OPEB reduction in the 2020 budget. One of the other things that we have been discussing with Washoe County is the actual payment of overhead, which are those indirect services that we get through IT and any kind of service from the Treasury and those kinds of things. I thought I would point out that last year when we did the budget, the forecast from Washoe County was that our overhead would come to $80,400. And at this point, what has been deducted on a monthly basis as of March 31st, we're looking at only having a total payment for indirect services as overhead of $54,000. So that, again, is a little bit of progress that we've been hoping for the last few years. So I thought I would point that out. Otherwise, I don't have anything of significance to point out in the balance sheet or the statement of revenues. Everything is on track. There's nothing out of line or unexpected.
Okay, questions or comments? See none, looking for a motion to accept that report.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? See none, please vote, or I'm sorry, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously. E, review of monthly encumbrance report.
This is a listing of the encumbrances as were on our books as of March 31st, 2019. I don't have anything new to add. If you have any questions about any of the line items, I would be happy to address them at this time.
Any questions or comments? See none, looking for motion to accept the report.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm looking for the rest of my agenda here.
Item number 5, board member comments.
Is that where we're at? Okay. Board member comments.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hartung?
So, Ms. Williams, you've got us scheduled at what time on the 23rd?
8:30.
8:30.
8:30? Because I know WRWC is at 9 in
Sounds
the
about
same
right.
place.
Right.
And then Tumwa's at 10.
Right. There were,
Okay.
all of the meetings are set so that people that are there for one can just move one to the other without having to leave and come back. And so they're coordinated in that way.
The sardine concept.
Exactly.
Right.
That's the technical jargon, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that everybody's
Yes.
prepared.
Okay, Ms. Stewart.
8:30 on the
Yeah.
23rd.
Yeah, I have a couple agenda items I'd like to request, following up on Mr. Hartong's questions about the 377B plan, what's in it, and basically how big of a drainage area. Because even though the projects don't go up North Truckee Drain or down Steamboat or up Thomas Creek, I think it's important to understand what drainage area we're looking at for the flood project, for this and for future discussions. So I'd love to see that come back with a map and a list of the projects. And if you have costs assigned to those, it would be good. If you don't, well, you don't. But it would be good to see that. So that's one. Number two, I've had discussions. We're closing out our budget, I think we have a budget workshop at Reno on Tuesday, and then we'll be, I think, finalizing our budget maybe Wednesday. But one of the items that's come up repeatedly is potential use of the flood project lands either on a interim, temporary, or longer-term basis for sports fields. And it came up again on our budget workshop on Friday. So I said that I would bring this forward, and I'd just like to ask if you could agendize an item for us to discuss potential use and assigning staff to work with at least the City of Reno staff, and I suspect, our partner staff, to look at could we, even on an interim basis before, all the big dollars are done. Clearly, we're going to be looking at the Vista Narrows before we ever get to a flood wall. And so those lands are probably going to be sitting there for 10 years, the way, it's going with our appropriate priorities. So can they be used very similar to this partnership where probably most of the funds would come from nonprofits or other profits that would help develop the fields. And we have a model for this in Reno where we've taken city land at the Moana and we've worked with a nonprofit, and they've been able to bring donations to upgrade the facilities so they can use them temporarily. It's been working fantastic. So that's the big question, is just could we put that on the agenda for some future discussion item, possibilities of assigning staff to work on that, make it a reality. And then I have a third one as well. The third one, I think, Mr. Chair, you actually started this one. 8 years ago, when the Flood Management Authority agreement was done, the ICA, we set up a voting structure, and the question has just been, we said we would review it at some point in the future to make sure it's working well, or see if there are any adjustments we need. It's been 8 years. I'd like to just see that come back on the agenda for board discussion. I don't have a particular preference on how it goes, but I think it's a proper practice to check in on that kind of thing. So that would be my request.
Well, just so you know, on that note, when we brought it back to change the voting structure, the only entity that tabled it was Reno. So
I
it's still in your court over there. And it's got to be approved by all three entities.
Of
again,
course,
so,
yeah.
Okay. Any other board comments, Mr.
And I
Wills?
didn't know what my predecessors did in terms of tabling or how long ago that was or anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to pose a question as far as the way the agenda is written. How broad of a discussion did you want to have on the voting?
Well, what I'd like to do is prior to the finalization of the ICA and the final voting structure, right up to 11th hour and 59th minute was proposed to be a different way. And so all of that was drafted out, and it was really driven by the Reno people to make it unanimous. That's my understanding. Well, I mean, I was there, but then later, there might have been other discussions that I didn't participate in. But yeah, I know that the Reno members at the time, which I was not a Reno member at the time, decided at the last minute to keep it unanimous. And, it worked well for me when I was director, but there have been questions that continue to come up, so it's just worth a conversation.
We've had several discussions over the years about the voting structure. Was there a particular voting structure that you wanted presented?
I
or
can
did you
send
want
it
a
to you.
broad
I can send it to you, but I'll give you the
Okay.
general concept
Thank
if
you.
you want me to right now.
No, you can just send it to me.
The concept was a majority vote on everything, which means 4 of 6. and the supermajority vote on important things like the budget, and changes to the 377B plan, a contract with the Corps, like a big overarching contract, not an individual smaller contract. And amongst that, on the 4 of 6 voting, there had to be at least one member from each jurisdiction that voted for the thing.
All right.
So that meant at least there was some buy-in. It wasn't like two parties, Reno and Sparks, said they want something and Washoe County didn't. There had to be at least one Washoe County person in that example that did want that thing. So that was an attempt to keep the unanimity and to go forward, but one person could object. And I'll give you a personal example. When we went to do the Virginia Street Bridge, Council Member Dan Gustin was on this board, and he was very committed to history, and his wife was on the National Board for Historic Preservation, and he had a very difficult time agreeing to tear down the oldest bridge in Nevada, and he wanted to vote no, but because we had unanimous voting, so as part of his principles, he couldn't get there. I had to structure a very convoluted motion to enable him to get there, looking at every option, which was appropriate. But it was very difficult for him for his personal beliefs or perspective, but he didn't want to hold up the project. It's just one example of many where people have voted for the common good but had real problem personally doing it. So it's that kind of situation. Okay, does that help you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments from board members? Okay, I'll open up the public comment. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak, please fill out a card. I do have one card. Kathy Bradhurst, come on down, Kathy.
Mr. Chair, after Ms. Bradhurst, I would like to ask a question.
Okay. Welcome, Kathy.
Hello. My name is Kathy Brandhorst, and I'm still the United States President. I know there's been a lot of women that come into our territory, and they play the United States President. They play the mayor. I am the mayor. They also play, different parts, too, so that they can steal my payroll checks. And that's exactly what's going on. They're stealing my payroll checks. I took a trip to San Jose, California, and I found all my stuff in windows, in stores, in department stores, in I guess it would be a shopping center. And I found all my stuff from the train cars. I never even got to open up the train car to see what was in the train cars. Some of these countries that I deal with, they cannot afford to pay me cash. They pay me in merchandise, and that's exactly what's happening. They pay me in merchandise instead of cash. And that helps them out a lot, and helps me out a lot too, to get the merchandise inside my home. But as soon as I do that, it's stolen. I don't have it in my possession anymore. I mean, I could have it in my hands. I'll be walking down the street and it's stolen right out of my hands. These people that are coming into our territory, they are escapees out of prisons. They're escapees out of jails. We have the majority of 102 from the Milpitas prison. They have been taken some back, but they escape again and back into our territory. We've already destroyed about 600 of them. And we are still in our territory, to do this, as long as we can make the public safer. The public does need a lot of help because they become victims. They see them murder somebody in the street. Now they are a victim. And that victim will suffer and suffer. No matter how hard, that victim wants to be released from all this, he's still in it. He saw it. But I just wanted to let you know that this is another crucial thing for a lot of the public in our territory. And they don't have a chance. They get the bullet holes right, in the public, because nobody knows that they're standing there. The enemy will shoot you down in public.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience wish to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the authority. Jay, you may have wanted to make a comment?
Yes, I did. I wanted to look at a summer schedule, and the items that Director Dewar suggested they're going to be lengthy in discussion, I would imagine. I also wanted to bring back to the board the January topic that we didn't have a meeting in January, which was the going forward direction that staff needed to, to try to plan out the remainders of time. And so I would like to do that if at all possible, seemingly July or August. And then what we would do is take some or all of these items that Director Dewar has suggested and put them in the other month. My thinking would be that maybe we take the month of June off, and then we have two very, very important meetings in July and August. Not that I'm asking for a vote, I just looking for a nodding of heads. That's what I'm planning on doing. And I think that would work for all of you. Is there going to be any problem on our August schedule or our July schedule of getting a quorum, do you think?
No, I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
You're just suggesting taking the June meeting off and then
Yes.
starting back up with July. I don't know if these items are going to be that lengthy, but they'll take some time, maybe 20 minutes or something, but.
Well, they will, and maybe you're right, but I think that in order for everybody to be able to be heard and
Yeah.
to contemplate the impact of everything that these items will be bringing forward, and in addition, the going forward notion. And I know, Director Dewar, you were there, Director Hartung was there, and I think that Director Abbott was there, but we did not have a quorum, and therefore, we need to have that
You mean
discussion.
at our retreat,
Yes, at our retreat.
before the budget?
That's correct.
Yeah, or our strategic planning.
Yes,
Yeah. I mean,
and
it was a really informative, but yeah, we couldn't really take action. 'Cause we
That's
didn't-
exactly right, and that's what I'm suggesting we bring back so that we have that discussion, put it on a meeting minutes record, and then staff has direction going
So
forward.
when did you want to do that?
Either July or August,
Oh, okay.
opposite the time that these other items would be brought
Yeah,
up.
and you can take the other items up in whatever order you want or whatever meeting seems appropriate. I mean, they don't need to be the very next meeting. I mean, it's,
Right.
you know.
I was just suggesting this is what I'm thinking about doing over the summer, so.
Okay. Mr. Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Aldine, Mr. Wolves, when you bring back the ball field concept, it'd be nice to have some history, because I know I asked for that in 2013, and there was pushback. I know we talked to Sparks about it, and the pushback, of course, was the fact that we were gonna need the land to construct the project, and so it'd be nice to just have some history of those requests.
It will explain all of that.
Okay.
Absolutely. There'll be a sizable presentation to provide you with that history, with the requirements of the project, and then some of the conversations that staff has had with outside interest of using that property.
Yeah, and I'll ask the people who've come talk to me to be here and participate, and also our our Parks Director and so on.
Yes, he's been part of the history.
Thank you. And then I'd also, of course, like to make sure that RTC is Mill Street, is that an RTC right-of-way only, or is that an NDOT right-of-way?
Carrie?
Just, it doesn't matter. We don't need to talk about that right now, but I guess the point is that it'd be nice to, one of the things that I had wanted to do if we were gonna move forward with the ball fields and having a recreational aspect is the extension of Mill Street to what was the concept of the Southeast Connector at the time.
Oh, to connect up?
Yes.
And I don't think Mill Street is NDOT.
I don't remember. I don't think it is either. I think it's RTC's, but
Well-
anyways, that's just one of the, just how do you move people in and out? And so we'll just leave it at that. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. Thank you, Mr.
And I
Chairman.
think one of the important aspects we need to know about is if we can actually let Reno use the land or if they have to buy the land. Okay? All right, any other comments, questions or comments? Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.